Hi, Simon. Great to have you on the program this year. Good to see you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Complete delight to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me along.
So, for those who don't know you, could you just briefly say who are you?
Oh gosh, so my name is Simon Wardley. I work in research for a company called DXC. I used to be a former CEO of companies as well. I built and sold startups. I'm best known for creating something called Wardley Mapping, which is a technique I created, 18 years ago, and I've used in industry and commercial industry and government and all sorts of different places. I do a lot of speaking at public conferences. I'm also a fellow of Open Europe. And lastly, I suppose I'm a self-appointed thought lord. I got so tired of people calling themselves thought leaders. I thought, well, I'll be a thought lord then. I've got a particular like of ducks. I used to have a duck pond, and ducks, they're foul, but not through choice. So I think they're wonderful creatures. So that's roughly me.
Great. So I think the first thought lords we have on the program.
Oh, a thought lord. I know. Yes, very serious. And one of the so I invented Wardley Mapping. We were talking actually earlier about the origin of Wardley Maps, and I used to just call them maps, and then people would say, "Well, what sort of maps are they?" And I thought, "Oh, I don't know." And they describe the value chain of an organization, so we call value chain maps. And somebody said, "Oh, you can't use that. Someone else is using that." Oh, okay. So what do you use them for? Well, I use them for all sorts of things. Challenge, strategy. Oh, strategy maps. Oh, someone else has got that. Oh, you've got to have a name. And eventually I just said, well, just call them Wardley Maps because it's an uncommon name. No one else will have them out there. And that literally is, where that name started from. Never ask me to name things. I'm very useless at that.
And now the tool is so used and started to have been spread that we were joking about that you are called named after the tool.
Yeah, that's quite funny.
Okay, so our program, we call it Leading in Complexity. So why should leaders care about complexity?
Oh gosh, why should leaders care about complexity? Well, first of all, you're a leader, which I assume means you're leading something, as in an organization, and organizations themselves are dynamic and sort of complex systems of social interactions between people. The second thing is that organization is doing something in a landscape, usually an economic landscape, and that economic landscape is a dynamic and complex interaction of economic components and forces. Why should you care about being a leader of a dynamic and complex organization dealing in a space which is dynamic and complex by nature? Because it's in the word, isn't it? It's in the very definition of what you're doing. So, but we normally cheat. One of my favorite things is Ashby's law of requisite variety. So, for those who don't know, Ashby's law is basically the controlling system has to have as much complexity as the inputs and outputs of what is being managed to effectively manage the space. And what's interesting about that is there are two solutions. Either you make the controlling system capable of coping with understanding what's going on, or the second solution is you pretend that what's being managed is simple. And we love doing that through what are called KPIs. So we produce these wonderful KPIs all over the place. Perfect way of managing them. They just make life simple for us rather than expose us to the real horror of what's going on. And they work just as long as everybody else is doing it.
Yes, I imagine having trying to control a complex system you would need infinite number of controls.
Sure, of
Easier
course.
to maybe fool yourself to thinking that you have control. So your talk is about situational normal. Everything must change.
Yeah.
So what is your kind of key message for leaders and how to navigate complexity?
So my message comes from the point, one of the key things for me is what we call situational awareness. So we operate in multiple different landscapes. One we're very, very familiar with, territorial landscapes, so geographic landscapes, and we understand that in terms of land and borders and all the rest of it. But we also operate in economic, technological, political, and social landscapes. Now, in order to make whenever you look at decisions that you need to make, there are some things which are are quite predictable. You can say if you throw a ball up in the air, it's going to fall down. Okay, most of the time. There are other systems which you can make some sort of predictions about, but it's a lot more difficult to do because there's so many components involved. And of course, then there's some systems which you really can't predict certain outcomes for. No system is entirely one or the other. There's often, whenever you're dealing with a system, there's bits of simple, bits of complicated, bits of complexity all at the same time. But what I try to do is understand that landscape that it's actually operating in. Because if you can't see that landscape, you can't see that environment, well, it's a bit like generals fighting a battle with nobody having any maps of the actual territorial landscape. I mean, it boils down to somebody going, oh, we should, I don't know, capture trees. Which trees? I mean, it's almost, and so I see this going on in the economic space and the social and the political space. And so my stuff is about how you map those out. And is it a problem for organizations? Well, just in the economic space alone, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had the Ukraine conflict. And of course, all of these organizations have suddenly discovered that they don't actually understand their supply chains at all. And it's sort of, they've just outsourced it to the market, and that magically worked when there was an abundance. But of course, when there starts to be problems and constraints, it all starts to fall apart in all sorts of ways that people didn't realize. But they could have done beforehand. There were ways of finding these constraints, and so that's the sort of stuff I look into.
Great, that's so intriguing. And situational awareness, I think, is such a key, not just jumping into solutions when it's a complex challenge you're facing. So really looking forward to hearing more about that in your talk on October 12th. So yeah, see you soon there.
I'll see you soon, and thank you ever so much for inviting me. Real pleasure.